and restore marine species and their habitats. Headquartered in Northern California, we currently also have offices in Texas and Costa Rica, but our tentacles extend throughout the Indo-Pacific and Atlantic regions of the Earth. We have some 200,000 supporters, with the strongest cluster here in California, but our activist network is spread out throughout the US and the world. Our salmon-focused project, SPAWN, the acronym for the Salmon Protection and Watershed Network, grew out of the need to help our local salmon that were getting stuck on the golf course dam way back in 1997. Next slide. For those of you who may be joining from far away or may be new to the watershed, let me give you a quick orientation of where the project is located and show you the route the salmon have to take to get here. So the Lagunitas Creek watershed, shown in the dark green area, is approximately 100 square miles in size. And it's the last undammed headwaters are located in the San Geronimo Valley. Only 9 square miles, or about 1/10 of the total watershed size. Salmon enter Tamales Bay from the ocean and swim approximately 15 miles through the bay to get to Lagunitas Creek. Once they enter Lagunitas Creek, they have to travel another approximately 15 miles through Lagunitas Creek into San Geronimo Creek to get to the golf course site. Next slide. Why is there such a big focus on the Lagunitas Creek watershed? In other words, why is this watershed so important to coho salmon? Our fish, the Central California coast coho salmon, are critically endangered. They were once found in many of the coastal streams of California, but now they are extinct in 90% of those waterways. The Lagunitas watershed has the largest remaining wild population left in the state. But even here, they are critically endangered, with only 200 spawning females per year, approximately. In any given year, up to half of those 200 spawning females will actually spawn in the San Geronimo Valley, which is only 10% of the entire watershed. Next slide. In 1997, the concrete apron of Roy's Dam busted, and the migrating fish were now able to jump up on the apron instead of using the old fish ladder, and they became stranded. Serendipitously, I discovered this and helped organize community action to help the stranded fish, which back then had recently been declared threatened under the US Endangered Species Act. Since then, unfortunately, the coho have been uplisted to the more acute status of endangered, meaning the species is in imminent danger of extinction throughout or a significant portion of its range if current threats remain. Next slide. So back then, we organized community meetings. We had more than 30 organizations participating, including national and state fisheries experts. We ultimately settled on a design by the National Marine Fisheries Service engineer, John Mann, and that project became known as Roy's Pools. Additionally, hundreds of local volunteers came out and helped, and over many weeks, the project was completed. Our then Secretary of the Interior, Bruce Babbitt, even came out and chipped off the first piece of Roy's Dam. I want to give a special shout out to Mark Warner, previously a resident of Lagunitas, who volunteered his company to provide the heavy equipment and construction for free, and also Ted Van Mitty of San Geronimo, whose company provided a lot of the concrete work for free. Next slide. We completed the project with a community celebration, as our community often does, all in time for the winter of 1999 in the migrating fish. Next slide. The project solved the primary issue, allowing adult fish to migrate upstream to spawn. And that top photograph there is the first fish we actually saw jumping through Roy's pools way back in the winter of 1999. But several unsolved issues emerged and remain to this day. The pools created too warm, basically because the pools leaked and they didn't hold water in the spring and summer, they created too warm temperatures, which can be lethal to baby salmon, allowed for algae buildup, and created habitat for invasive bullfrogs, which can prey on baby salmon. Which brings us to today, presenting a great plan to fix these persistent problems and improve habitat for salmon and other wildlife species. Before I hand this over to Preston Brown, who will talk us through the project's major elements and will be managing this project, I also want to acknowledge Gail Seymour, retired California Fish and Wildlife senior scientist, who worked tirelessly to ensure that Roy's pools move forward with a plan to address these problems and improve the chances that this critically endangered species will have a fighting chance at survival and recovery. Preston, take us into the future.
Thank you, Todd. Good morning, everyone. This project is exciting because it encompasses many restoration elements. Not only are we removing the failed fish ladder, the Roy's pool structure, and what's left of the broken apron, we're also removing a failing and unsafe pedestrian bridge that is held up by 2 rotting logs and is no longer safe for crossing. We're restoring that complete network of channels with free-flowing, gentle slopes where riparian vegetation can establish and have an ultimately wider riparian buffer. We're fixing failing stream banks where sediment is being sloughed off into the stream bed, smothering spawning gravels. And we're creating a home for more wildlife species and a wider band of riparian trees. And not only that, we're involving the community throughout every step of the process. So people will be able to help us grow the native plants and plant them at the site, care for the trees, water them, help us do the monitoring and the restoration evaluation, and ultimately be involved in a really big project that's very exciting. So now I'm going to walk you through some of the primary restoration elements. So this map is a bird's eye view of the restoration blueprints. To orient everyone, on the left side of the screen, you can see my cursor. This is the San Geronimo Valley Drive. This road parallels the west and the south side of the former golf course. Adjacent to San Geronimo Valley Drive is the Roy's Pool structure. So in the lower left part of the screen, you can see a new pedestrian bridge will be replacing the old one. And what is now the Roy's Pool structure will be replaced with a natural, gentle, free-flowing channel. Moving upstream, we have some side channel or off channel habitats in this location that provide critical winter and spring rearing habitats for juvenile salmonids. These are areas of slow backwater connections where water can spread out through different channels and fish can find much more opportunity to survive large storms, find slow water, and forage on insect prey. Moving upstream from there, we have areas where steep, unsafe banks will be laid back to gentle slopes to allow a much wider riparian buffer to establish and a better area for salmon to be able to find floodplain and small riparian habitat elements. Also noteworthy is we have included some interesting undulating features, which are large tree islands. Here in the center part of the project, several tree islands are built to maintain the riparian habitat of the mature trees, create dynamic and undulating topography that provides valuable habitat over a range of flows for fish and provide a lot of shade and nutrients for the creek environment. Lastly, further upstream at the further right side of this photograph, we have two floodplain alcoves and benches. Essentially, these are, again, very over-steepened banks sloughing sediment into the stream bed. By laying those banks gently back, we're creating a wider riparian corridor where the creek can naturally evolve and maintain itself, meanwhile provide safer access to the public and a more dynamic environment for the salmon and other wildlife. In total, this project is roughly 2,000 feet long from the San Geronimo Valley Drive bridge upstream to an existing golf cart bridge that is the termination of the project. As Todd mentioned, one issue that has been ongoing with the Roy's Pool structure is fish become stranded in the pools. As juvenile coho and steelhead smolts rear in the upper watershed and move downstream in the springtime to go into the ocean, they often become stranded in these pools, leaving, unfortunately, a lot of opportunity for prey to kill these fish, prey on them, and unfortunately are lost to predation. Meanwhile, warm water and high temperatures lead to dissolved oxygen levels too low for salmonids to survive. So routinely, every spring, spawn and other biologists have gone into these pools and rescued fish out of these traps in order to set them free downstream. That's what makes this project such a highly valuable and beneficial project. This Roy's Pool structure is considered the highest priority fish passage barrier in Central California, according to NOAA. This project, removing the structure, recreating a natural free-flowing channel, is the highest priority fish passage project in the Central Coast. And many organizations, including NOAA, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and others, have invested a great deal of thought and energy into developing healthy, robust designs that will create a lasting, resilient result. So, what will the ultimate fix for Roy's pools look like? It might look something like this. The photo on the left shows the existing Roy's pools, sheet metal weirs with stagnant water stuck between them. And the photo on the right shows a comparable stream bed of gentle slope of bubbling, dancing water with a mature forest. This is a perfect example of what the site will look like once the stream has been restored and a natural, mature riparian area will be able to establish. We may call this Roy's Riffles. In addition to removing the man-made structure associated with the dam and the fish ladder and the Roy's Pool structures, we will also be laying back very over-steepened banks. As I mentioned, a lot of these over-steepened banks are throughout the project area. They're unsafe for public use, and they unfortunately slough off a lot of fine sediments, sands, and clays, and topsoil into the stream bed, which can smother spawning gravels, reduce the food availability for salmonids, and increase water temperatures. By laying back many of these over-steepened stream banks, we can reduce the sediment loads into the creek, create a gentler riparian slope where the creek can have a little bit more room to be natural. Here's an example of what these over-steepened banks look like. This photo, for example, actually was at a property just downstream from the Roy's Pool structure that Spawn completed in 2011 with the partnership of the private landowners. This is an over-steepened bank where fine particles of clay and sand were sloughing off every year into the stream bed, creating a very unstable bank and smothering salmon eggs and spawning beds within the creek channel. Photo on the right shows what 2 years of growth did following the restoration, where native willows, alders, oaks, and redwoods have now been able to establish. This is a perfect example of how laying back the banks can reduce the fine sediment load and create a much more stable creek channel environment. This is what we will be doing along the project areas. Many organizations from local, state, federal, and tribal nations have permitted, evaluated this project for several years. Many organizations have participated in the vetting and permitting of this project. And I would say almost 50 different people of scientists, hydrologists, engineers, and technical experts in their field have vetted and evaluated this project, which the end result has led to a very robust and dynamic and resilient design. So I'd like to identify some of our project funders and supporters. The primary funders for this project have been the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Fisheries Restoration Grant Program and the NOAA Restoration Center, as well as Turtle Island volunteers, donors, members, and supporters have all contributed funding and match to support the development of this project. I'd like to identify our key project partners. This includes our expert hydrology and engineering design team of environmental science associates. This is an expert group of professionals who have been involved in some of the most cutting edge stream restoration work in the world. They are expert and have a very deep understanding of the project area. Secondly, I'd like to identify the former landowners of the San Geronimo Golf Course, Robert Lee and his family, who were instrumental in allowing the initial restoration to begin. They were in agreement that the project needed to go forward, and they helped initiate the initial feasibility studies and designs. I'd like to identify the existing landowner, the Trust for Public Land, who had the foresight to partner and purchase this land and preserve it for a public park. They have been great partners in developing these plans and supporting the work thus far. Humboldt State University has been involved in participating in archaeology investigations and other cultural resources understandings to let us know how the project can limit its impact on cultural resources. And lastly, the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria have given their input and support in the project in developing deliberate designs that reduce the impact to cultural resources significant to the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. Now I'd like to talk about the downstream impacts of the project. As I mentioned, we have done a lot of work with our expert hydrology teams to do one-dimensional and two-dimensional hydraulic modeling that has resulted in a very good understanding of what we expect to see at the site. This graph on the right shows an example of the upper line, which if you follow my cursor, is the existing water surface with the Roy's Pools project, with the Roy's Pools structure intact. The line on the bottom, however, shows what the new water surface will be once the channel is restored. You see there's an 8-foot difference at the San Geronimo Valley Drive Bridge of a reduction in 8 feet of the water surface from a result of the project. This means that by removing the Roy's Pools Dam, restoring the channel, and coupling it with small floodplain restoration work upstream, we are actually able to shave the top off those high storm events, bring the flood stage down, and reduce its velocity through the bridge. This is an encouraging example of how this project will actually help reduce flooding in the immediate vicinity to properties immediately downstream and the San Geronimo Valley Drive Bridge. We have done these models from low to middle and high storm events. This photo on the right of the graph shows what the water surfaces will be in a 100-year storm event. Not only this, our designs have taken into account other modeling that show depth and velocity through the project area reducing, allowing sediments to settle out, water to be spread out, slowly sink into the groundwater, and reduce the velocities downstream. The project has many significant elements, including working around the most prominent features at the site, which are the large ancient heritage oak trees. The large oak trees at the site of the Valley Oaks will be protected as part of this project. They are valuable assets to the habitat at the site, and the designs have gone to deliberate work to work around these large trees and incorporate them into the restoration work. Additionally, many other large trees, as I mentioned, the tree island component of the project, will be preserved through routing the channels around large trees in order to preserve the natural and the mature canopy of that vegetation. However, a select number of 57 trees, primarily made up of younger willows and alders, will have to be removed as a result of the project. This is due to the fact that a lot of these trees are perched on oversteepened stream banks that will eventually fall in, but in order to restore the stream bank to a natural, gentle grade, reduce the sediment loading in the creek, we will be removing these select number of trees in order to lay back the banks naturally. A lot of the trees will also be incorporated into living live habitat structures and large woody debris structures where the wood and the trees themselves will be used as part of the project. We will also be planting 850 large container trees at the site, as well as thousands of other perennial plants, shrubs, grasses at the site in order to establish ultimately a mature riparian forest. Lastly, by widening the riparian corridors, we will ultimately be able to have more trees at the site in the future, because a wider riparian area, which we will achieve by this project, will replace the very narrow, thin band of trees along the creek currently. So ultimately, we will have a wider riparian area with a higher density of trees in the future. With that, I will pass it on to Audrey Fusco, our native plant nursery manager, to talk more in depth about our revegetation plan.
Hi, everyone. The image that you see on the screen shows the different areas that we'll be adding vegetation to. Some of these areas will just be adding a native grass seed blend, and some of them will be planting with container plants. And the different colors show the division between the toe and low bank areas, the mid-upper bank areas, and the upland area. The upland area is where excess soil will be removed from, the banks will be spread. And the toe and lower bank areas are shaded in blue, the mid and upper bank areas are shaded in orange, and the upland area is colored in green. Each section of the bank will be planted with a species that will be best adapted to the conditions that that area provides. So the plants located in the toe and low bank areas are adapted to withstand a high level of inundation. But the plants in the mid and upper bank areas can only tolerate some flooding, and they don't like to be in standing water for a long period of time. So I just wanted to show you sort of the breakdown between those different areas. And it's important to remember that this is not a hard category, but it's a general guideline for where we'll be placing the different species of plants that are included in the plan. So let's move to the next slide. I'm going to quickly go through these slides that list the details of the revegetation plan for each bank area. So here you can see the species and quantities planned for the toe and low bank areas. And the toe area is just a name for the summer water line. Low bank is obviously the area that's close to the creek. And the revegetation plan is based on the plants and the plant communities that are already present on the site. This planting area that we're working in, it currently contains a mix of native and non-native plant species. And of course, we'll be removing all of the invasive understory plants, which include English ivy, French broom, poison hemlock, and many other species. And we'll be replacing the invasive plants with native perennial understory species. We're going to be using a diverse set of plants in order to provide direct benefits to all of the wildlife that use the riparian corridor. And the low bank areas, as you can see on the screen, we'll be planting white alder, arroyo willows, creek dogwood, big leaf maple, and Oregon ash. We'll also be adding more shrubs such as twinberry and Pacific ninebark, and perennials such as coltsfoot, vines including native blackberry, which is especially good at stabilizing slopes, and ferns like sword ferns and lady ferns. And I'm not going to read off all the details for the plan, but as I go through this, just please look at the screen, and also feel free to email me with any questions about the details of the plan. So let's move on to the mid and upper bank. So this area we're planting with a wide variety of trees, including buckeyes, redwoods, coast live oak, and blue elderberry. And as Preston already mentioned, the large heritage oaks that are near the project site will all remain untouched by the project. And this mid and upper bank area will include a diverse set of shrubs, including coffeeberry, hazelnut, and coyote brush. And we'll also be including a wide variety of perennials, and including mugwort, sword fern, coyote brush, thimbleberry, and vines such as blackberries and honeysuckle. And we also have a wide variety of graminoids and a broadcast seed mix that reflects the grasses that are currently found in the area. So let's move on to the next slide. We have an upland area, which is, again, where the soil will be spread out, which will be removed from the banks. And in this area, we're going to be including just a sort of a basic grass broadcast seed mix that's composed of species that are locally common in this area. And we'll also include poppies and a few other wildflower species that are commonly found in the area. So let's move on, and just want to talk about the vegetation plan in summary. We'll be planting about 6,500 native plants and plugs altogether. And we'll be planting 850 trees and willow stakes, 2,250 shrubs, perennials, and vines, 3,400 plugs of grasses, sedges, and rushes, and then 205 pounds of native grass seed will be broadcast. And that broadcast seed mix is going to be a minimum of 50 pounds per acre that we're seeding. Also, I want to just mention that all of the plants that we have been growing for this project have been growing in our nursery for the past 2 to 3 years, and they've been cared for by hundreds of volunteers and students, and lots of members from the San Geronimo Valley community. Also, all of the seeds that we've used to grow the plants came from the watershed locally. So also, we are going to need a lot of help with planting, and we would love to see all of you come out and help us plant in the fall. As soon as the rainy season begins, we'll be putting plants in the ground. So please get in touch with us in the fall, and we'll let you know how you can come out to help. And we're not currently running volunteer days at the moment, but hopefully we'll be able to reopen that up. So please do email me and let me know if you're interested in coming out to volunteer in the nursery or helping us with seed collection this summer. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Preston.
Thanks, Audrey. So briefly, I'll go over our project timeline. So starting this summer, we will be doing, beginning in July, with preparing the site for the restoration. That means setting up protection fencing to protect trees and other sensitive areas. We will be mobilizing equipment and crews to the site. then we will be actually removing the dam itself, which is exciting, removing all the man-made structures, the sheet piles, the concrete, the failing bridge. We will be restoring the channel with natural structures. We will be doing native landscape recontouring to shape the riparian corridors in a way that fits with the landscape and the natural hydrology. We'll be doing erosion control and revegetation to close out the summer. Starting this fall and winter and going into the spring, we'll be planting the thousands of plants that we have growing in our native plant nursery. So planting container plants, planting stakes, willows and dogwood stakes, and many thousands of grass plugs and vines and ground covers across the site. Through the spring and summer, we'll be watering and caring for the vegetation. And following that, we will be evaluating the restoration work itself. And that will involve many different elements and nurturing the site so that in the long run, we will know that the site has been put on the right trajectory for success. So throughout the project restoration, we will be adhering to the compliance in our permitting. That includes protecting air and water resources, protecting species by relocating them out of the project area in order to do the restoration work. We will be surrounding sensitive areas and valuable trees with protective fencing and safeguards, and also using best management practices to control dust and noise at the site. We have a thorough erosion control plan that involves native and biodegradable materials that will protect the site against wind and rain erosion. And lastly, we will be following all worker health and safety codes to protect workers and crews at the site, as well as the public. So what to expect during the restoration? The work days will happen Monday through Friday, and on the weekends, Spawn will host restoration site tours where people will be able to darn a vest and a hard hat and follow Spawn staff down into the project areas to get up close and personal with the restoration work and see how the project is progressing. The public will be able to access the public park during the restoration, and certain areas will be cordoned off for safe public viewing. These will be areas that the public can identify and go to and to be able to see the restoration in action. Other areas, however, will be hard hat only zones, and Spawn will be able to take people into those areas exclusively under tours by Spawn on the weekends. At the site will also be project information, signs and displays with updates, progress reports, and contact information for how to learn more about this project and get involved. So how to get involved? Well, as Audrey mentioned, our native plant nursery is booming with plants, and we need a lot of help to grow the plants and care for them before the restoration goes in the ground. We need help collecting native seeds this summer to grow the plants for the restoration and broadcast the seeds at the site. In November, through the winter, planting many thousands of plants and trees at the site. We need many people to come help us do this. Join your friends and neighbors in participating hands-on with this restoration work. If you're calling in from far away or you're not able to be present to volunteer, you could adopt a redwood, which helps support Spawn's programs. And by adopting a redwood, you will get a designated tree at the property with your name on it. And that's a redwood grown by volunteers, planted by community members, and taken care of by Spawn staff and volunteers at the restoration site. You can visit our website, seaturtles.org, to find more, and email myself, Todd, and Audrey, which our contact information will be at the end of this presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Becca to host our question and answer session.
Thank you, Preston, and thank you so much to all of those who have answered questions. We've already received a lot, so I'm going to jump right into it. One question that seems to be on a lot of minds is for you, Preston, which is, does COVID-19 have any impact on the project?
So at this moment, we do not expect that the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown will have an effect on the project. We do expect that during the restoration process, all crew members and personnel will have personal protective equipment and be following state and local and CDC guidelines on how to protect themselves.
Great. Let's see, another question. Todd, if you could answer this one. It's regarding downstream homeowners. How will the project impact conditions to downstream landowners?
So as was mentioned by Preston in the presentation, actually what we'll be doing is spreading out the creek, so the water will also be spreading out. So the water will have an opportunity to sink into the ground while it's spread. It will slow down the water, decrease the velocity of the water downstream, and actually help protect downstream homeowners and reduce flooding. So this project, this is physics. If you take a bucket of water and pour it out, it spreads out, it's slower, it's thinner, and it basically reduces impacts to downstream homeowners.
Great. Let's see. Here is another question for Preston, which is a few parts regarding trees on the site. Why do trees have to be cut down? And hasn't there already been trees being cut? And with those 57 removed trees, will those be repositioned to other areas, or will they end up being chopped up for other purposes?
So the first part of the question is why do trees need to be removed? Well, in order to remove the dam and the sheet piles and the concrete and all the hardscapes associated with that, we need to remove a select number of trees, as well as being able to lay back the oversteepened banks to a gentle grade. Some vegetation has to be removed. I kind of equate it to like a clogged artery. The dam is a block on the artery of the creek. In order to fully and effectively remove that clog, sometimes you have to go under the knife, so to speak, and surgically extract the clog, in this case, the dam. And in doing so, will ultimately result in a healthier, more stable environment. And the short-term impacts to removing select trees will be more than mitigated through a much more natural, free-flowing, healthy creek with stable banks and a stable creek channel. The second part is how some trees already have been removed. There, as a part of PG&E's trimming of trees around the San Geronimo Valley, there is a power line at the site that PG&E has trimmed the trees, and that is a completely independent project from the Roy's Pools restoration. PG&E does not have any involvement in this work, and they did that independently. So SPAWN has not taken any trees at the moment. And then the last part is, will some of the trees be incorporated? Yes. Some of the vegetation will be used as living habitat structures. Willows in particular can be repositioned to provide living habitats within the creek. other larger woody species can be turned over and used as large woody debris habitats as if they naturally fell into the creek. And those will be able to provide unique dynamic habitat. And part of the project is requiring logs and woody debris structures. And what we could use on site is probably the most sustainable and cost effective.
Great, thank you. Let's see, Audrey, this is one for you, which also has to do with trees and plants. And that is, how do all of those plants benefit fish and other wildlife in the area?
Okay, well, basically, near pretty much all wildlife species visit riparian corridors in their lifetimes. And Todd already mentioned the physics of the way that doing this creek work will help to provide protection from flooding, slows water velocity down, helps recharge groundwater, plant roots filter water. So there's a lot of benefits that just happen in terms of the way that vegetation helps to maintain a healthy ecological system overall. But also, it's important to know that plants don't all deliver the same ecological benefits. So I often get asked, why do we want to use native plants? What does it matter? Because non-native plants can also, hold things together. But invasive plants don't actually play all the same roles that native plants do in an ecosystem. So they're not actually, invasive plants don't provide food for animal life in the same way as our locally native plants do. And I think it's just really important to know that insects have co-evolved with the plants in a given area forever. And so, insects are really particular about which plants they eat. And insects are at the base of the food chain, and they feed a lot of animal species, including juvenile coho. So when we have native plants like willows that are close to the creek, they're attracting insects over to the water. So basically, plants provide a ton of benefits for all of wildlife. And that's why we try to grow a very diverse set of native plants to add to our restoration sites.
And if I could just add really quickly, so that vegetation helps to slow the water, and it creates eddies and places for the baby fish to survive those big flood events that we have. And the limiting factor that for survival of fish in our watershed is providing that refuge habitat for the nursery areas for these fish. And so that roughened area of trees in the water, the large woody debris structures, the flooding onto the banks where there's all this vegetation, just creates places for the fish to hide and survive.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into the next question for Preston, which is how will the project benefit coho? And are there any concerns when the project is open and people have access to the creek? Are there any concerns about perhaps dogs or other recreational uses in the area when the project is complete? Are there any concerns for how the coho will be protected?
Well, I would encourage all people to keep their dogs on leash near the creek, and especially during the spawning season. But specifically to the first part of the question, how will the project benefit fish? Well, first and foremost, we're being able to remove the highest priority fish passage barrier in Central California will allow fish from juveniles, from fry to smolt to adult spawners to access up and down the watershed through the site any time of year and over a variety of flows. So unimpeded access through the watershed is a huge benefit. Not only passing fish, but passing wood, nutrients, stones and gravels and rocks help build habitats. Todd mentioned that the limiting factors for salmonids in the watershed is the ability for juvenile fry to find slow water refuge in the winter. So a major component of this project is creating off-channel habitats. So those are side channels, floodplains, alcoves, backwaters, etc., that provide quiet nurseries for fish to reside. And so they can spend less energy fighting fast currents. They can find cover from predators, and they can forage on insects. So that's a major component of the project. So connecting the headwaters fully with a naturally restored channel, with a larger riparian forest with more complex off-channel habitats is a major benefit for all coho species, for life stages of coho and steelhead.
Okay, and so speaking on life stages, we had a couple questions about spawning coho, and that is, do coho already spawn in this area? And if there is a concern that the construction could short-term impact those coho, and how much spawning habitat occurs upstream of the project area?
So a lot of spawning actually occurs at the site and upstream. Woodacre Creek and Upper San Geronimo Creek are very high densities where spawning happens. So there's a lot of fish that spawn up above the site and into the upper watershed. And at the site specifically, there is a lot of spawning. And one of the main reasons why this project involves lowering the oversteepened banks is a lot of our oversteepened banks at the site have fine clay and sand particles that, as they continue to slough off like big icebergs, imagine, that sediment smothers the spawning beds. And the spawning beds are loose, clean gravel that need to be well oxygenated and free of fine sediments. So by removing that potential threat, we're able to improve the salmon spawning beds. Secondly, by allowing the riparian corridor to be slightly wider, we can allow for natural sorting and metering of sediments, which is a major benefit to the health of the spawning beds, is allowing the creek to naturally kind of maneuver itself a little bit more, will allow sediments to self-sort and meter through the watershed, basically separating the fines from the coarse gravels. And that's a major component to the project. And so part of the protecting the existing spawning spawning sites has been woven into the deliberate and careful planning and design of the project, so that we can preserve the really rich and abundant spawning grounds at the site and protect them into the future.
Thank you. Here's a question about another creek, which is, do coho use Larson Creek?
I could take that question. So the answer is yes. And we've done work, and others have done work to try to fix that creek. So for fish to enter that creek, they have to go under Sir Francis Drake through a culvert that has had some problems and is another area that needs to be repaired. Unfortunately, in recent years, with the numbers down, we haven't seen as many coho salmon in Larson Creek as we have historically. But this is another project that is on the list of things to do, and hope to get to it, either us or another organization sometime soon.
Let's see, we have a couple questions regarding the cost of the project. We're wondering, has all of the necessary money been raised, and what was the cost overall of the project?
Yeah, all the money has been raised. The total cost of the project's a little over $2 million. And that involves a lot of the deliberate, careful restoration planning and the construction. So the funding from the State Department of Fish and Wildlife has been allocated already, and then the membership supporters and match from Turtle Island has already been secured.
I would just add to that the primary costs or the primary funding basically pays the contractors doing the heavy equipment, bringing in the heavy equipment, moving the soils around, and design. So I think probably maybe about 10% of the or 90% of the money of those $2 million goes to pay contractors.
And is there a set day in July for construction to start yet?
Well, we don't have a set date yet. We're anticipating early July as the beginning of the work.
Great. Let's see. We have about 5 more minutes to continue answering questions. Thank you for everyone for participating. Audrey, this is a question. We have some plant questions. One of them is, how are you removing English ivy effectively?
Well, English ivy, there's one special thing about that plant, which is that if it's covering trees, you have to actually cut the vine, about 2 feet off of the ground, and not pull the vine off of the tree until it's fully dried out. So typically you would want to cut the English ivy sort of close to the base of the tree at this time of the year, let it dry out through the whole summertime, and then you can actually remove it in the fall before the rainy season begins, typically, as long as its roots have sort of dried out, and so you can easily pull it off the tree. Otherwise, you can harm trees. But basically what we have to do is just dig it out. So we follow the vines and just, it takes a lot of time. It's manual labor, but you can remove it effectively. It just takes time.
Great. And then is there a concern that using coyote brush in the planting plan might impact the grasslands and increase fire fuels?
It's not really a concern of mine because there's already coyote brush near the site and all over the area. We can control the coyote brush if necessary in other areas, but as far as being a wildfire fuel, there's still a lot to learn about how we're going to be able to effectively manage vegetation. And some of the presentations that I've recently been to, like the fire safe gardening presentations that happened in February at the Marin Garden Center, we actually learned that coyote brush isn't necessarily as big of a fire hazard as what it's been portrayed to be. And that's partially because California native plants typically hold more water than about twice as much water, I was told, as the average Mediterranean climate plant does. And so, it's still a fairly safe gardening option as far as plants go.
Great. This could be for you, Audrey, or Preston. And this is about the irrigation plans. Where will the water come from? How much water and for how long?
I can answer that. So the irrigation will come from the existing infrastructure from the former golf course. So we will have a series of sprinklers through the project area that will wet down all trees and ground covers to get the grass and shrubs and understory plants and trees established for the first 3 years. And so we anticipate that probably after 3 years, there might be a more selective watering approach, such as a water truck and trailer to water individual trees. But after about 3 years of thorough spring, summer, and fall watering, we expect that the site will pretty much be free to grow at that point.
Great. Let's see. We have room, I think, for maybe 2 more questions. Thank you again, everyone who asked questions and for attending the webinar. And again, if we didn't get to your question today, we will be sending our contact info so you can reach out to us directly with any remaining questions you have. So this question, Preston, I think you could help answer, which is, was this job put out for competitive bidding?
Yes, we did put this bid out for a competitive bid. We received bids from interested contractors who have experience in the realm of stream and wetland restoration. And so those that bid process is open, and we will be awarding a contract to one of the competitive bidders.
Great. And here is, we have 1 more minute for 1 more question. Thank you again, everyone, for participating. This question is, will import of spawning gravels be part of the project?
Hey, I'll go ahead and answer that. We won't need to do that. If there is any sorting of soil that we're taking out, we can add that back in. So we'll be looking at that. And just one other question that I saw, and I have 30 seconds left, and it was a great question. They all have been great questions, was why not fill in the ponds with that extra soil? And that is a great question. And it was a question we all asked. And it created a whole new permitting situation that would have taken years to sort out, because those ponds may be considered wetlands at this point. So I just wanted to answer that question too, because it was a great one, and one that we did discuss when the golf course closed.
Great, thank you. Well, we've reached the hour mark. So again, thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. Again, we will be sending both a recording and our contact information to you after this presentation. So if you didn't have your question answered, or you think of anything else, you are more than welcome to reach out to us directly, and we will answer them. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your Thursday.